So I'll just be really quick and say welcome everybody to our Sierra Club community conversation. I'm Steve, and I'll be popping in now and then as a host, but I want to welcome everybody, and we're really excited tonight to have a great discussion online about ratepayer protection and about geothermal networks. And Debbie New's been putting a lot of work in on some great new ideas about geothermal networks, and Jim is going to share with us about ratepayer protection ideas. And with that, I'm really just going to pass it off to Debbie and Jim and welcome you both. Really glad you could join us tonight.
If I may add really quickly, I'm so sorry. If as you enter, could you please mute yourself until the discussion part? Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Great. So I'm Debbie New. I'm really glad to be here with Jim Dumont and with all of you. Thank you very much to the Sierra Club for inviting us to talk about two really important bills tonight. And I just to introduce myself, and I'll let Jim jump in when it's his turn and tell you about his background. I am the coordinator for the Vermont Community Geothermal Alliance. I also am a co-leader for the network action team that's focused on thermal energy networks. So we have a larger alliance that's an information sharing umbrella kind of place to host learning opportunities and be the facilitator for things. And then the network action team is a bunch of people really focused on trying to deal with the barriers and also the opportunities for implementing more geothermal and thermal energy networks in Vermont. So those are the two things I'm working on now, and also working on the ratepayer protection with Jim and other people. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I just want to double check and make sure everybody can see. Is that good?
I think that looks good.
Okay, great. So Jim and I are going to talk about two bills tonight that are at the State House now that have the same common denominator, which is achieving an equitable, effective energy transition. These two bills share the same idea, that to accelerate our energy transition in Vermont and to manage it to be both equitable and effective, there are two key steps we can take now. One is adding thermal energy networks, which is a proven community scale clean energy solution, to our list of energy choices. And I'll explain what those systems are for those of you who haven't been attending the webinars that talk more about those recently. And number two is to help Vermonters afford their electric bills now. So if we're telling people to switch to electric, it should be affordable and fair. And we'll talk more about that later. I'm going to talk about H242, the Thermal Energy Networks Act. This was a bill that was part of the ratepayer protection bill, but we split it off to be its own standalone bill because all of the shopping around we did really showed us that everybody thinks it's a no-brainer. There's widespread support for it, and we wanted to be able to move it through the legislature as efficiently as possible. So this bill adds this proven solution to our energy choices in Vermont by creating a pathway for geothermal and other thermal energy networks. And I'll explain more how that works later. Jim is going to talk about this bill, H56, the Ratepayer Protection Act. This allows Vermonters to afford their electric bills by expanding electric ratepayer protection to a statewide program so that all low and moderate income Vermonters can pay their electric bills as we try to electrify everything. So first, adding a proven solution to our thermal energy choices. Geothermal solutions, as I'm sure you know, are not new, but networked systems that use geothermal and other thermal sources are a relatively new idea in Vermont. We know they're not going to work everywhere in our rural state, but what can we do and how will they work here? How can they be an important part of the mix of solutions that we need? What we're talking about when we talk about thermal energy networks, this is a term that's starting to be used nationally, especially in policy arenas. Obviously, thermal refers to heating, which we need a lot of in Vermont, but it also encompasses cooling, which we're going to need more and more as the climate warms. And the kind of energy we're talking about is geothermal from the ground, but it's also about capturing waste heat from other buildings. Think about pools, ice rinks, breweries, grocery stores, and also capturing energy from wastewater, which if you think about your dishwasher, your washing machine, the showers you take, there's a lot of heat that goes down the drain every day. And we're talking about networks. In other words, pipes that form closed loops. The principles at work here are exchange and balance. In order to take advantage of the thermal energy we already have under our feet and in our communities. So we're not talking about deep geothermal, like for power plants. Some people refer to that as hot rocks geothermal. And we're also not talking about district energy, like steam from burning things, from biomass or gas. We're talking about mainly water in pipes. So let's start with an individual home. You're probably familiar with how geothermal energy works. So when you turn on your heat, the ground source heat pump inside your home delivers warm air and extracts cold air, like an air source heat pump does using outside air. But the ground source heat pump, the energy comes obviously from underground. When you need cooling, the process reverses. The same heat pump delivers cold air and extracts heat, returning it to the earth. So this is also a storage system. This energy comes from underground, where the Earth's ambient temperature is a constant 50 to 55 degrees generally. Water-filled pipes bring that temperature to your heat pump, where it's concentrated into hot or cold air as needed. So a networked system can be even more efficient and can get the benefits of this, one of the cleanest heating and cooling solutions, to more people. For example, in a town center like this one, buildings can be connected to vertical bores that are linked by horizontal pipes that form these closed loops that exchange temperature with the earth and share it between buildings. Excess heating and cooling isn't wasted, but can be exchanged efficiently between them. And these systems can grow over time, so we can start small and build them in our communities. I want to just quickly run through the benefits of networked geothermal or thermal systems, because there's so many. First of all, they're safe and clean. So with mainly water in the pipes, there's no risk of explosions or hazardous leaks and very low emissions. They can be affordable and reliable. So once installed, and we'll talk about cost, of course, but once installed, the customer bills can be low and predictable all year around. And they're healthy because nothing is burned inside, so indoor air is healthier to breathe. They're flexible. They can fit into a lot of different kinds of landscapes, many locations with a minimal footprint. They're also resilient and secure because these durable pipes underground are mainly protected from disruption. They're also equitable because as a community scale solution rather than house by house, they can take care of people along the street, in a neighborhood. More people at once can get access. They can also be just because fossil fuel workers can use the same skills they already have to install these systems. In fact, gas workers have recently told a trainer, a ground source heat pump trainer, that their skills are almost identical. They basically said, yeah, we do that. We do that every day. We know how to do that. They're also local, and this is a really important piece of this. So the energy coming from underground, but also around us in our community, means that our energy dollars stay here and we don't have to import any fuels from outside. So these systems are already working. We have them in Vermont. We have geothermal in Vermont in large buildings, but it's hard to see it from outside, so you may not know. Champlain College, St. Mike's College, Hula in Burlington, there are a lot of large buildings and more buildings signing up all the time to get geothermal energy. Colorado Mesa University is a great example of a networked system. So you're looking at part of the campus right now, and you can see the rectangular squares, the green rectangles are where the boreholes are drilled, and the red lines are the underground pipes that are connected to the boreholes and to buildings, exchanging temperature between them. So this system has been in operation for about 12 years, And at our next webinar on April 4th, we're going to hear more about this. This will be a case study we'll get some data on. But for now, for people who like numbers, you can come back to this later. I can share my slides. But the important thing here is, I would say, under cost savings, look at that first bullet. The campus is saving $1.5 million in energy every year. And that's just one of the benefits. Thermal networks are also happening all over New York State because of a bill they passed last year, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you can see there's more than one project in many of these counties because utilities are required to have pilot projects in process now. So there are about 35 projects in the works in New York State, just over the lake from us. And on the right-hand side, you can see Framingham, Massachusetts, just to our south. This is a project where they have done all the testing they need to do, and they're putting the system in the ground this spring. You can see the green areas are where there are several schools. And then in the bluish purplish, that's affordable housing, and a red fire station in the lower right-hand corner. So this is also a utility-based project. So what is this going to look like in Vermont? Well, we have a lot of new construction, and that is the lowest hanging fruit when you are building something new, to start with a geothermal or thermal network solution. But there are also town centers that have multiple thermal sources, a grocery store, a brewery, an ice rink. I mentioned some of those. So to learn more about what we can do here, we looked to New York. And as I mentioned last year, New York State passed a law called the Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act. It passed in their Senate unanimously, supported by a really surprising coalition. They had all of the utilities, labor leaders, in particular the pipe fitters, the gas workers led this initiative, and also environmental and climate leaders. Everyone was on board with it, and it passed unanimously. So we took that bill and we created a Vermont version. Because Vermont is different, we didn't need to require utilities to do this. Vermont Gas was already ahead of everybody else, looking at how to create a business unit to do geothermal energy. But what we wanted to do is allow existing utilities, gas or electric utilities or electric co-ops, to become thermal energy network utilities. We also wanted to allow other entities to do it as well, because we want to be able to have these systems across the state. So to make more of these systems happen, the bill allows fuel companies, solar developers to expand, to evolve their businesses to do this work, but also for municipalities, nonprofits, community organizations, homeowners associations to apply to the PUC to become utilities to do this. So how does that help? Well, if you can use a utility model and be a thermal energy utility, you can access the capital you need to put the infrastructure in the ground. So through banks or grants or low interest federal loans, and there is a lot of federal money available, not just for incentives, but actually for low interest federal loans to install this infrastructure. So if you can access this capital, being a utility, then you can recover those upfront costs through rates over time and receive a return on the investment. And my favorite part would be thinking about what nonprofits or co-ops could do with the return on the investment, putting that back into the system, putting it back into the community. So the PUC's role here is to approve of the entity, to say, yes, you can be a utility if you meet certain requirements, and also to oversee the rates, making it a much more equitable system. Right now, there are mainly private companies putting these systems in the ground, and they just can do whatever they want in terms of how and how much they charge people. So there is a lot we can do now. And to really get going in Vermont, we need to pass H242 to allow Vermont utilities, businesses, and communities access to a way to implement thermal energy networks. And I hope you're collecting your questions. I'm sure you have a lot. I'm going to turn it over to Jim to introduce himself and talk about the ratepayer protection part of things.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jim Dumont. I practice law in Bristol. I've been doing environmental and energy law for a long time. H56 includes the ratepayer protection aspect of what Debbie's been talking about. The fundamental concept behind it all, as Debbie has mentioned, is if we're telling the public you need to switch to electric, we've got to provide a safety net for the lowest income Vermonters. And right now, Vermont does have a ratepayer protection for some electric ratepayers, but it's not good. It's way, way less protective than that in every other state in New England. Studies have shown that if you're a low-income Vermonter, you might be paying as much as 51% of your monthly household budget on energy. Whereas if you're an upper-income Vermonter, that could be 3%. And we shouldn't be telling people you got to choose between paying your electric bill and paying for your food or your rent, particularly having told them you got to switch to electric. So what this bill proposes to do is to tell the PUC we've got to do better. And it's not all that simple, but it needs to be done so that we're protecting low-income Vermonters better. Right now, as the slide shows, Green Mountain Power has a program, but it's minimal, frankly. The typical discount that a low-income family receives right now is $25 a month on their electric bill. If you look at New Hampshire, by contrast, and it's always embarrassing to compare us to New Hampshire and find out we're not doing as well, but this is an example. In New Hampshire, if you're a low-income ratepayer in a certain category, you can receive as much as a 76% discount in your electric bill. Because without that, you're telling people that you got to make a choice between paying your rent or your food and your electric bill. And part of the bill is also to mandate that the application process, which is now somewhat burdensome, be improved so that, for example, if you're on 3 squares, you're automatically enrolled and you don't have to fill out an application. As the slide indicates, a study was done of the Green Mountain Power program, and only about a quarter of eligible customers have signed up. And that's because there's paperwork and the benefit is not that much. So why bother? And you have to reapply every year. So you have to reapply every year for a minimal benefit. And we need to do better, and this bill proposes to do that. The goal of the statute is to keep energy costs down to about 6% of household income if you don't heat with electricity. If your electric bill includes both lighting and heating, we're thinking that the right goal is 10%. And we're thinking that we would want to exclude electric vehicle charging from that. That would be separate. And the bill focuses on helping consumers who are at or below the federal poverty level. One of the issues is, what about the utilities other than Green Mountain Power? We have lots of little utilities in Vermont, and they have complained that if they had to do something like this, they don't have enough resources, enough middle income and upper income ratepayers to shoulder this load. And so the PUC has already said it makes sense to do this on a statewide basis, so we'd have a statewide rate base. The utilities have questioned whether the PUC has the legal authority to do that, and the bill would clarify that by stating explicitly the PUC does have that authority. To be clear, this is not going to be paid for by taxes. It's going to be paid for by other ratepayers. And the impact on other ratepayers will be small, in the neighborhood of $1.50 to $2.50 per month. As I said before, many other states in New England do this. They all do it, and they all do it much better than we do. So that's H56 in a nutshell.
Thank you. I'll just wrap up to remind people of the bill numbers. H242 is the Thermal Energy Networks Act, now a standalone bill, and H56 is the Ratepayer Protection Act. And to remind you what the ideas are, is to protect low and moderate income households, to benefit all Vermonters by creating more in-state clean energy, and to make our mandated climate goals more reachable in a fair and just way. And we would love to hear your questions.
Oh, great. Thanks, Debbie and Jim. That was a great intro. A couple of great ideas there. So folks, if you want to put your questions into the chat, that would be great. Or if you just want to raise your hand, go right ahead and do that, and we'll watch these come in. But I have a question, Debbie. How big do these need to be to make sense? How many homes or businesses, or what's it in those examples, or is there some like the community college there seemed to work with its neighbors pretty well, so that sounds like a pretty big system.
Right, so these systems can get really big, but just to start, they could be a single large building, or they could be a small development. And what engineers tend to say is it depends. You run into that answer a lot. It depends on what the thermal loads are and what kind of balance is needed. If it's a heating dominant system, how much geothermal drilling is possible, and how you might offset that with other sources. But it would take, I would say, about 24 houses to make it worth putting in as a starting point.
Okay, so that's a house development or village in Vermont, or a industrial park.
Sure. Sorry, was that a question? I missed part of what you said.
I'm just sort of picturing how that might work out in Vermont. A lot of small communities, village or a certainly new development, like you said. Lots of commercial, I suppose, too.
Yeah, so I live in South Burlington, and I know that's where you are too. And there's construction all around us. Think about
Right.
Williston and Essex and even Heinsberg and beyond. There are also a lot of campuses I'm hearing about that are being converted to new uses for housing and for other purposes. Those are perfect places to look at.
Debbie, do you want to talk about a little bit more about the non-geothermal heat sources that I know you and I have been hearing a lot about over the last month or so?
Sure. So I mentioned grocery stores and ice rinks and all of that, and also wastewater. So a lot of people think about these systems as just geothermal and needing to drill a lot. And we get questions about the land in Vermont being mostly bedrock, and how is that going to work? Well, that's true. That's a concern. But what is really eye-opening and exciting about these systems is that we don't have to just get the energy from under the earth. There's a lot of temperature around us from other buildings, but also wastewater treatment plants, or even just wastewater pipes. We can pull the temperature from those. And because these are sealed, closed loop systems, it's perfectly clean, it does not smell, but there is a steady stream of temperature that we can recover from wastewater, or from a grocery store that has a lot of refrigeration and ejects heat. We can capture that heat and use it.
Great, that's great. Renee has a question about in the chat here about backup or backup power, electric power, when there's a power outage, and I guess that's a pretty good question for a lot of us who have any kind of a furnace that really depends on our electricity as well. How does that work with the community system?
Well, the electricity that is needed is the electricity to run the pumps that move the water through the system. So it definitely depends on electricity. One of the things that is most highly recommended, including by an engineer I met with this morning, is to pair these systems with solar so that you have the electricity you need and you can get to pretty near zero emissions on the whole system. But there are systems that use gas and propane backup. And in our cold climate, that's probably a safe way to start and see how it goes. The Colorado Mesa University system that I showed has a gas backup system, and I don't believe they've ever or rarely used it.
And Debbie, how much electricity is used for these ground source heat pumps as compared to air source heat pumps?
Well, I don't have the numbers. I'm not a numbers person, but I know that in our webinars, those numbers have been shared with people. But it is a lot less. And the ground source heat pumps are a lot more efficient because the temperature is a constant source. So they can run at the same level all the time, whereas an air source heat pump, when it is really hot outside or really cold outside, they struggle to provide the heating or cooling that's needed. And so their efficiency goes way down. Not true with ground source heat pumps.
All right, I'm going to go to Andy and then Suzanne. See a couple of hands on the screen here.
Yeah, you mentioned as a possibility a dozen houses to be networked together. One of the issues with these, where you have a situation where you have excess heat in one building and excess cooling in another, you can share that, or where there's a source of heat that's not being used. All good. When you pair a bunch of residential units, they all require heat at the same time. There's no sharing there. And so you need the amount of boreholes you need depends on the loads. And if you need a borehole for every house, a network system has the additional cost of putting all the piping between all the houses and the rather complex controls that entails as well, so that you've added cost, but you've not added any savings. I'd like to also comment that you mentioned the earth is 55 degrees all the time. With boreholes in a residential setting where it's primarily heating and very little cooling in our climate, even with air conditioning, the boreholes get colder as the winter goes on. And therefore you even have to have antifreeze in that loop because it can get down to freezing and below. So as the winter draws on, the earth gets colder around the borehole and the efficiency goes down. I have designed and measured performance on ground source heat pumps, and the amount of heat you get per unit of electricity that you put in over the season with this type of system is around 3, maybe 3.5 if you do a really good job on design. And an air source heat pump will be about 2.3 in our climate, 2.3 units of heat per unit of electricity that you use. So you're about 50% more efficient with the ground source heat pumps. The ground source heat pumps do have a societal advantage of lower demand, lower peak demand in the winter. So that's a good benefit. But the devil's in the details on this, on how they're designed. And in residential, where it's predominantly heating over the course of the year, that may or may not be true. I've heard you, and also in the previous webinar, say the energy is local here. These are powered by electricity. Heat pumps use the heat from the earth, but they're powered by electricity. They're really just a more efficient way of using electricity. And so that's not local here. We don't make all of that here. We should make lots more of it. And yes, we should make more of it with solar. But in order to do heating with those solar panels, you're going to need storage because you need to heat at night as well as during the daytime. So I think these things have their application, but I think if they're promoted as having a too broad application, you'll hurt yourself in the long run in trying to get these implemented.
Thank you for your comments. Do you have a question or more you want to add?
No, I don't. I just
Okay.
wanted to.
I know we're going to have a conversation later about your list of concerns. So I welcome that conversation with Cara and some other people. So thank you.
Thanks. Suzanne.
So my question is, what is the easeability? That's not a word. How easy is it to combine houses? So if you have one structure that's going to go on geothermal, then 2 years later, another structure goes on. And how easy is it to connect a vertical to horizontal systems?
That's a great question for an engineer. I am a teacher and I'm a community organizer. And my intention is to get this idea on the table and collect the people who can help us overcome the barriers and take advantage of all the opportunities we have. So these systems are being advanced rapidly in other states, and I want to make sure Vermont doesn't fall behind. So that's my perspective on these systems. And we are working hard to make sure we have the experts in the state and pulling national experts in to answer all of these questions and concerns and to try to do this right in Vermont. Because that, when it comes down to it, we need to have some very good, efficient installations in Vermont to start with, so that we can get them in more Vermont communities. So I appreciate the detailed technical questions and comments. And I think the best thing to do is collect those and take advantage of the webinars and the national experts that we have to answer some of those questions.
Great. Rob, you have a question.
I was just throwing in the chat, but Debbie and Jim, is at the State House, I've heard some people say about including this issue into like a housing bill, because basically if there's this mad push to make greater development. So I wanted to hear what you both thought of that process of incorporating this bill, because we're late into the legislative session, and about how to get this across the finish line. So that's why I just want to know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, Jim, do you want to answer that one or start?
Sure. Since everybody we've talked to in the legislature, the private utilities, Burlington Electric, energy experts, nobody says this is a bad idea. Everybody says it's obvious we need to do this. As Debbie says, we still need to find out how to do it best. So Rob, your idea is one that would be wonderful if we could tag this onto some other bill that's going to make it to the governor's desk. And the housing bill may be one. Maybe it's end of session budget adjustment. I don't know, but it'd be great to find a way to do it.
So I have another question of Debbie, if you're familiar with these other projects that have been done, it seems like they're maybe done on in areas that are not new construction or not new neighborhoods anyway, which probably means, I imagine, a mix of users and non-users. Is that accurate? Is that do you have any sense from talking to people how that's worked out?
Well, I can share what I've heard, which is a lot of these systems are on campuses. And so there's some buildings that are part of the network and some that are not, but it's all a single owner, essentially. So that's easy. There are also new developments like Whisper Valley in Texas. There's 312 houses on this system in Toronto, and that is all private developer and new construction. So again, single owner. Right now in Framingham, Massachusetts, Eversource gas company is putting that system in that I showed you the bird's eye view of earlier. And they needed to go out and get people to agree to be part of their pilot. And that's happening in New York as well. So what I know about that is that the sales team got their training and they went out around the neighborhood and knocked on all the doors, and they had their best 24 hours of sales that they have ever had. And nobody has backed out of the project yet. So that's what I know. But customers signing up for a retrofit like that is definitely part of what there needs to be a really good strategy around.
So anyone on the call on the Zoom here who wants to be a pilot project?
I do think that it will be hard to start with retrofits in Vermont. I think we will probably see these systems going into new developments first.
Maybe I'll just throw in a bit about Representative Cordes, who can't be with us this evening. She has been behind both bills from the beginning. She's been twisting every arm she can find in the State House, going to meetings. She has become the champion of these two bills, and I want to recognize her for that wonderful work.
Susan, you're still on mute. Yep.
Jim, can you talk about the ratepayer protection bill a little bit more about in terms of legislative strategies and yes, that just lay it like that.
Yeah, Debbie and I were in a meeting earlier today to discuss that, and it looks like the best strategy right now would be to get a summer study committee to move the ratepayer protection part forward. So that when the legislature reconvenes in January, we can say everybody's had a seat at the table, we've worked out all the bugs, and here's what we want to do going forward. But I should say we haven't had a chance to talk about that with Representative Cordes. But as a practical matter, that seems like the best possible outcome for H56 right now. Debbie, what do you think?
Yeah, that aligns with what we heard.
And you have experts lined up who will be very helpful.
We hope so. Yes, we can, if it's in terms of testifying before a legislative committee in the next couple of weeks, that's more difficult. But for a summer study committee, yes, we wouldn't have any problem getting those people to participate.
And those people come from the National Consumer Law Center, which is a prominent low-income ratepayer advocacy organization. They've been very helpful to us in talking about the bill.
Thanks.
So we have a couple of questions in chat here. One is it, and this is back to geothermal, is it just too expensive for a single family home?
I'm really glad you're asking that question. I have been focused on affordable housing and I guess I want to say average Vermont families and residents and what people seem to be able to afford these days. And so I was asked a question, or I actually made a statement on a previous Zoom call about single family geothermal not being affordable. And what I meant was it's not very affordable. So yes, it's major infrastructure in terms of the drilling or the pipe laying that needs to happen. And that costs money, and it costs more money to drill in Vermont than in other states because of our bedrock. That said, there are companies and IRA incentives that up to 40% off these systems, that if you can access the money to pay for it up front, you can get a lot of money back. And of course, you'll recover a lot of money over time in energy savings. But it does cost a lot of money to do it. And right now, I would characterize it as a more affluent person's energy choice in Vermont. That's what I'm seeing. And I would love to hear what other people think.
Okay, we've got another question in chat here from Renee, wondering how the Framingham experience compares with getting people to sign up with Montpelier's district heating system.
Well, that might be a question for anybody here who has experience with the Montpelier district system. I can just say that I was told to be thoughtful about comparing to that system because it has been a difficult process as far as I hear. So I wonder if there's some people from Montpelier or who are clued into that who can compare what I said about what I've heard about the Framingham project with what people here know about how the Montpelier one has gone. Steve, can you see Andy? He has his hand up.
Yeah, Andy.
I'm not directly connected with that at all, and I have kind of peripheral information. But what happened was the cost of the system rose enough that the cost to hook onto it, plus the fact that the energy from it was not cheaper than other ways of heating, really dampened enthusiasm for signing up. The original hope was everybody along State Street would sign up. Well, they didn't. Almost nobody did. The state buildings and some of the Montpelier buildings, not even all of those. And so it was cost driven that really drove down participation in that. And these were unexpected costs. You asked also about the cost for these ground source heat pump systems. And I call them ground source heat pumps just to emphasize the fact that it's a heat pump, which is electric driven. Geothermal sounds like free energy somehow. And I usually associate that, as do others, with places where actual steam comes out of the ground from, that kind of thing, like Iceland or places in California. I'm seeing single family home systems like this costing in the $80,000 range, like double what you would pay for an air source heat pump system. And so it's been, and I see a lot of benefits for the ground source over the air source. The longevity of the components in the building, the lower peak demands, the higher efficiency, but it's really hard to get past that cost.
Yeah, I want to raise it as actually a Montpelier resident about the Montpelier project, the Montpelier District Heat Project. As far as I know, it is, it's basically, it's only the state buildings and the city, Montpelier City Hall and the school. And there's been some challenges with those. I know the former mayor is now state senator, so she was going to look into how, if it could be converted into geothermal, because it is an opportunity to maybe even with existing piping underneath the city, but it was a challenging project to build. So again, that's why I asked you the question around about these new housing developments, including it with the housing. It's like, if we're building something brand new or there's a new project, what a great opportunity to make sure it's not using fossil fuels. I mean, like in Burlington, they passed that like the ban on fossil fuel in new buildings. Well, there we go. There's a solution. So we can try that. But that's what I just wanted to add.
That's right. We passed a similar ordinance in South Burlington. And I think there are others in the works. Well, any more questions, folks? I'm waiting. Yeah, okay. Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jim and Debbie. This has been really enlightening. And I noticed in the chat, Rob dropped a link for registering for the April 4th conversation. I don't know if there are any other, and I understand that there was a webinar Monday or yesterday that will be posted tomorrow. Can you direct people to where to find that if they're interested?
Yes, certainly. So the webinar that happened on Monday was hosted by EAN and Energy Action Network, and it will be on their website, but you can also find it at the Vermont Community Geothermal Alliance later in the week. It's not up there yet, but that's
Okay.
vcga.net.
Okay. And as far as the ratepayer bill, we'll just have to sort of wait and see as that progresses. Great, great. All right, well, Debbie and Jim, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
And if any folks want to hear more about the Sierra Club and what we are doing in Vermont, I'll direct you to Rob Kidd, who's here on the call. Rob, do you want to share contact or have any other updates for anybody?
Yeah, basically, if you just go to the Vermont chapter website, where we have all of our information, it's sierraclub.org /Vermont. And that will give you the link. I'm gonna actually put it in there for 1 second. But any events that we do normally come up, like including our chapter meetings that we have. So here's just look you up on there. And we don't have any other events scheduled at this moment, but we're looking on hosting a variety of things coming up in the near future. And I'll send a recording of this event to everybody, so you can share it with people who aren't able to attend, or you're like, oh, what was that Debbie said? You can check back into it. So anybody who registered will get the link And then the people who registered who didn't attend will get the link too. So,
Great.
That's fair.
Well, thanks
Oh.
everybody for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to appreciate everybody for showing up and for learning more about this and for your questions, because there's a lot of work we still have to do. So appreciate your input.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night, all.
Good night.